රෝස සුවඳ තවත් දෙකෝ කලක් රැඳෙන්න ඩබල් පර්ෆියුම් ලුක් සමගින් එන best ever sunlight rose.
Tonight, just the beginning. Finance Minister Ali Sabri says that multilateral and bilateral talks are going well. However, a long, hard road still remains.
It all depends on how quickly we are going to negotiate with our creditors, how serious we are on tax reform, because right now, no country can be run with 8.6% of revenue.
Bad behavior. The Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority calls on protesters to treat tourists like VIPs.
Arrivals per day has come down to 2,300 by 20th of April. So that would be a loss of about 80 million US dollars.
Higher authority. The Archbishop of Colombo and a delegation of Easter attack victims take flight for a papal audience seeking justice. Up the mountain. Inflation in March hits 21.5% on the back of higher food and non-food prices. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9 this Friday, the 22nd of April 2022.
වැඩිම ආරක්ෂාව අඩුම මිලකට කෙටයක් රුපියල් 54යි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Bring you news from across the island. This is First at 9 and I'm David Ebert. Finance Minister Ali Sabri today offered an update on his deliberations with multilateral and bilateral partners on the sidelines of the International Monetary Fund's summer meetings. He stated that so far the response from the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank and India have been good, with the Asian Development Bank having already agreed to immediately release $21.7 million US dollars for medicine purchases. However, the outcome of the IMF talks and rapid financing instrument, he said, would depend on how fast Sri Lanka can achieve some semblance of debt sustainability. To do this, the Sri Lankan team has to convince the IMF of how serious it is about reforms and set the ball rolling in its creditor talks.
We have three strategies immediately to get emergency funding. Second is to get some bridge financing. Thirdly, go back to the growth trajectory. That's the plan. So emergency funding, as I told earlier, there are few fold. India is one of them. So we are also talking to China and Japan. We are also talking to World Bank and ADB. And RFI is a special instrument that is from IMF. We have not come here to ask for an RFI specifically. We came here to get into a program, EFF. But in the meantime, we also mentioned the RF. But as you know, any release of funds from IMF is preconditioned to the fact that debt need to be sustainable. So in order to do that, we need to talk to the creditors, convince them we are serious in repaying and getting into some sort of an agreement. So we are working overtime. Talk to the creditors, try to get into a debt agreement. In the meantime, staff level consultations in terms of fiscal reforms, in terms of institutional reforms, in terms of tax reforms. So when all these things go somewhere down the line, we should get some sort of support. But as of now, immediately, no IMF will not release an RFI overnight. It takes time. And it all depends on the progress. So hopefully we will see some sort of a progress somewhere down the line. It all depends on how quickly or efficiently we are going to negotiate with our creditors, get into a debt restructuring program, how serious we are on tax reforms and the other reforms. Because right now we get just 8.6% of our GDP as revenue in order to run a country. No country can be run with 8.6% of revenue. So you need to go there to 13 to 14%. Otherwise, the inevitable fall is there. So it's important, as we have taken over, both myself, the governor and the state, being very honest with anyone whom we are talking, whether it's the public, whether it's the IMF, whether it's the bilateral part. So honesty is the best policy, and truth and absolute truth. So RFI may not come immediately, but RFI, we were not totally anyway dependent on the IMF, but we have been talking to World Bank. Response has been very good. ADB response has been good. India had been extremely forthcoming. I'm sure China and Japan also will help us. And we have other few options, which everything I can't divulge. We understand as much as you. That is right now. What is important is to look after our people and restore their supply lines. And they don't deserve the kind of hardship they undergo. We all understand. It's heartbreaking for us to say that. And we have come here to find a solution to that. And again, I must apologize that we have to put them through this hardship. It's not only our problem. This has been an accumulation of the problems of the policies what successive governments in this country have done.
Meanwhile, the leader of the House, Minister Dinesh Gunawardena, told Parliament today that the Committee on Parliamentary Affairs has decided to hold a debate on the 4th of May, the same day that the Minister of Finance is expected to present a roadmap to the House based on discussions held with the International Monetary Fund. Meanwhile, sittings were forced to be adjourned by the Speaker for about 20 minutes today due to a heated exchange of words between the Leader of the Opposition and government members over his request to present to Parliament a roadmap to be followed by the government to resolve the economic crisis.
මේ තියෙන අයවැය සංශෝධනය කරලා පාරවල් කාපට් කරන්න ඔය මන්පීරු හදන්න ඔය එක්සර්සයිස් පාත් වලට වෙන් කරපු සල්ලි ටික මිනිසුන්ට සහනයක් හැටියට ලබා දෙන්නට අලුත් අයවැයක් ගේන්නේ නැද්ද? මොකද්ද මාර්ග සිටියම? මේක ගජමිතුරු නව ලිබරල් වාදී ලුම්පන් ධනවාදයකට ගිහිල්ලා මිනිසුන්ට කන්න නැහැ, ඖෂධ නැහැ.
න්‍යාය පත්‍රය කටයුතු කරලා අපි සාකච්ඡාවට ගියාම එතුමාගේ සාකච්ඡාවට යන්න පුළුවන්. නැත්තම් මේ වගේ හැමෝම කතා කරොත් මොකද වෙන්නේ?
මම මෙහෙම ප්‍රතිචාර දක්වන්නේ මම රජයෙන් ඉල්ලීමක් කරා මාර්ග සිටියම ඉදිරිපත් කරන්න කියලා. එහෙම මාර්ග සිටියම ඉදිරිපත් කරේ නැහැ. ඊයේ ගෲප් එකේ අනුමැතිය අරන් තිනවා අගමැතිතුමාගේ ප්‍රධානත්වයෙන් ඉදිරියට යනවා කියලා.
මේ නියමිත
88 දෙනා ඉඳලා තියෙන්නේ. මේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ බහුතරය 88ද 113ද?
පළවෙනි වතාවට කියන්නේ ඔබතුමා කීකරු වෙන්නේ නැත්නම් මම සභාව නවත්තනවා. ඔබ
මේ බණේ කියනවා මේක න්‍යාය පත්‍රය කරලා කතා කරන්න කියන්න.
සභාවේ ගෞරවය රකින්න සූදානම් නැතිනම් මට සිද්ධ වෙනවා සභාව නවත්තලා යන්න.
මිනිසුන්ට කන්න නැහැ. අන්දවන්නද හදන්නේ?
කීකරු වෙන්නේ නැද්ද සභාවේ
කරන්න එපා.
සභාව මේ කල් තබනවා. බොහොම ස්තුතියි.
මේ රටේ ඛේද වාචකයට මූලික වුණු මුර්ග හස්තය තමයි විධායක ජනාධිපති ක්‍රමය. මේ මුර්ග ක්‍රමය අනිවාර්යෙන්ම හකුලන තුළු සමගි ජන බලවේගය කෙලින් හිට ගන්නවා කියන එක මේ අවස්ථාවේ කියන්න කැමතියි.
ඔබ කියා සිටියනේ no confidence motion එකක් ගේනවා කියලා මේ සුමානේ. අද සිකුරාදා. no confidence motion. If you all have a majority, you present the no confidence motion. That was the position Honorable Prime Minister, the President, all of us took.
ආණ්ඩුව ඇතුලේ මොකද්ද වෙන්නේ 113ක් තියනද නැද්ද කියලා අපි දන්නේ නැහැ. මේ විශ්වාස භංගය නම් මම ඉල්ලීමක් කරේ මුදල් ඇමතුමාගේ කතාවෙන් පස්සේ අපි එකට එකතු වෙලා කතා කරමු මොකද්ද කරන්න කියලා. එතකන් විශ්වාස භංගයක් දාලා වැඩක් නැහැ. මම එකක් කියන්නම් 113ක් තියෙන ආණ්ඩුවකින් නම් මේ ප්‍රශ්න විසඳන්න බෑ. අඩු ගානේ 175ක් 200ක් මේ දෙපැත්තේ සහයෝගය දෙන්න ඕනේ. එහෙනම් අපිට සම්ප්‍රදායික දේශපාලන ක්‍රමයෙන් ටිකක් ඈත් වෙන්න වෙයි. මේ සම්ප්‍රදායකයේ කරොත් වැඩි කල් අපිවත් පන්නලා දානවා මෙතන. එතකොට අපිට ගිහින් ගෝල් ෆේස් එකකින් කෑම කන්න වෙයි. මොකද කන්න වෙන තැන නැති වෙනවා.
ඒ ඉහළ නිලධාරීන් හම්බෙන්න වෙනවා මේ සම්බන්ධයෙන් සාකච්ඡා කරන්න. මේ පොඩි කට්ටියත් එක්ක සාකච්ඡා කරලා මේ ප්‍රශ්නේ විසඳන්න බෑ. මේ හිනහ වෙන්න එපා මේ දිනේෂ් කුණාදෑමතුමා. දැන් හිනහ යනවා ඔයගොල්ලන්ට. හැබැයි උනාට මිනිස්සු අඬනවා. දැන් අපි කතා කරගෙන
ඉන්නවා සාකච්ඡා වාර කරනවා. බිත්තරේ කඩන්න එපා. ඒ සාකච්ඡා වාර ඉවර වෙනකන්.
ගරු අගමැතිතුමා හිටපු අගමැතිතුමා කියපු කතාව සම්පූර්ණ ඇත්ත. අපිට රෝඩ් මැප් එකක් ඕනේ. එහෙම නැත්නම් මේ සල්ලි ඉවර වෙනවා. මැයි වෙනකොට අපිට ජූනි වෙනකොට තෙල් ගන්න සල්ලි නැති වෙනවා.
මේ ප්‍රශ්න ඇතුලේ විධායකය අපේ ජනාධිපතිතුමා පිළිගත්තනේ. එතුමා යම් තීරණ ගත්තා. හිතුවක්කාර තීරණ ඒව අපේ ගැහුවේ නේ. ඔබතුමා උත්සාහ කරන්න මේ ජනාධිපතිතුමා නිදොස් කොට නිදාස් කරන්න. ඒක බෑ. ඒක බෑ. සමල් ලැබෙතුමනි මොකද මේ ප්‍රශ්නේ ඇතුලේ අපි නිසාද නෑ. කතානායකතුමනි අපි පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට බලය ගමු. එක පුද්ගලයෙක්ගේ තීරණයට වඩා මේ 225 බහුතරයේ තීරණය වැදගත්.
Now, citing a marked reduction in Delhi tourist arrivals since the 20th of this month due to shortages, power outages and social unrest, the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority has called on the public to avoid obstructing the movements of tourists and give priority to staff of dollar earners such as the garment and tourism industries. Director General of the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority, Dhammika Vijayasinghe, made the request during a statement released today, where she observed that daily arrivals have reduced to around 2,300 from 3,800. The Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority says that shortages and social unrest have begun taking a toll on tourist arrivals, according to the latest figures from the 20th of April. Addressing the media today, SLTDA Director General Dhammika Wijayasinghe revealed that despite numbers in January to March having shown some promise, daily arrivals have dropped from 3,800 to 2,300 per day as a result. She urges the public to give due priority to tourists as well as staff of key dollar-earning industries on the streets and avoid obstructing their movements.
Our earlier projection was that we would get 1.1 million tourists during 2022. However, we are happy to note that we were able to get higher numbers in January, February and March. Actually, we got 106,500 tourists in March alone. So we increased our target to 1.37 million arrivals, and we projected a 2.3 billion revenue from tourism in 2022. However, we are sorry to note that with the scarcity of fuel and gas and then the recent calamities, our arrivals have now dropped down. We had an average arrival of 3,800 arrivals per day in March. However, it has come down to 2,300 by 20th of April. So that would be a loss of about $80 million. I have to say that it is very important for us to keep our forex earning industries going, that is the garment industry and tourism industry. So we have to treat our garment industry workforce and the tourism industry workforce as well as the tourists as VIPs on the road. So I appeal to our general public, please do not engage in any violence against tourists. Treat them well. We are famous for our hospitality. We need dollars for our next shipment of fuel, our next shipment of gas and medicine. So help keep this industry going.
Wijayasinghe also cited recent reports of protesters in Veldavaya who had obstructed tourists from heading towards Colombo as examples of acts that can leave a black mark on the country's reputation as a hospitable tourist destination.
The recent incidences in Veldavaya and Vilpattu, where tourists had been obstructed, have been widely circulated in media, and this will bring some black mark to our tourism industry. I know all of you are under pressure because of the situation of the country, but we have to express our displeasure to the power, but we should not obstruct the tourist or the garment industry workers during this tough time. And I'm sorry to note that we had this ADB annual conference scheduled in Sri Lanka. This was cancelled, and it alone marked 1 billion rupee loss to the country. And if we continue with that, will cause further loss to the forex earning of the country.
Meanwhile, Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjith, and a group representing the victims of the Easter Sunday terror attacks left for the Vatican this morning for an audience with His Holiness Pope Francis. The visit was organized in response to an invitation from the Pontiff to meet with and hold discussions with the victims. On Easter Sunday this year, Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjith, conveyed the wishes of His Holiness Pope Francis to meet with the victims of the 2019 Easter Sunday attacks. This was conveyed during a special event organized to remember the victims of the tragic attack and to voice the Church's demands for justice.
මට තේරුම් ගියා එදා පාස්කු ඉරිදා දවසේ මොකක් හරි හොර වැඩක් මෙතන තියෙනවා කියලා. හිටපු නීතිපති ඩප්පුලද ලිවේරා මහත්මයා කියාපු විදිහට ග්‍රෑන්ඩ් කොන්ස්පිරසි මහා කුමන්ත්‍රණ මේක මුස්ලිම් කණ්ඩායමක් බලය ලබා ගැනීම සඳහා පාවිච්චි කරලා ඒ අයව යොදවලා මේ ප්‍රහාරය සිද්ධ කරලා මිනිස්සුන්ගේ ඡන්දය දිනා ගන්න කරපු කුමන්ත්‍රණයක් බව පැහැදිලි. මේ වැඩපිළිවෙල ගැන හරියාකාර විමර්ශනයක් කරන්න අපිට දුන්නේ නැහැ. විමර්ශන යට ගැහැව්වා. විමර්ශනයේ හරියට කෙරුණා නම් මේක පිටිපස්සේ ඉන්නේ කවුද කියලා හොයාගන්න පුළුවන්කම තිබුණා. ජනාධිපති කොමිසමටත් අවහිර කෙරුවා සමහර අය. විමර්ශන කරගෙන යනකොට සාක්ෂි එළියට එනකොට ඒ මිනිස්සුන්ව එතනින් අරගෙන ගියා. යම් යම් කොන්දේසි පැනෙව්වා. ඒ නිසා සත්‍ය එළිදරව් වුණේ නැහැ. ඒගොල්ලෝ පුළුවන් තරම් මුල ඉඳලම කිව්වේ මේක පිටිපස්සේ ඉන්නේ අහවල් කට්ටිය විතරයි. ඊට වඩා දෙයක් නැහැ. ඒ නිසා එහෙම කියලා ඊට විරුද්ධව තිබිච්ච හැම සාක්ෂියක්ම මකා දාන්නට නැති කරලා දාන්නට මේ කට්ටිය උත්සාහ කරා. අපි මේක අතාරින්නේ නැහැ සහෝදර සහෝදරියනි. කවදා හරි යුක්තිය ජයගෙන මිනි මැරුම් කරපු අය කවුද කියලා අඩු ගානේ දැනගන්නවත්. ඒ නිසා මේ මියගිය 269 දෙනා ඒ විතරක් නෙමෙයි තව දෙන්නෙක්ව මැරුවා පොලිසිය දෙන්නෙක්ව වවුනතියෝ කියන තැන. මේ 271 දෙනාගේම ලේවලට පරීක්ෂණ කරන්නට ඉඩ නොදී ෂේප් කරලා අරින්න උත්සාහ කරන බලවත්තු වගකියන්න ඕනේ.
Accordingly, the Archbishop left the country in the early hours of today for the Vatican for an audience with His Holiness Pope Francis. Further, at 7:30 a.m. this morning, a group of 60 victims from the 3 churches that were targeted on Easter Sunday also departed for the Vatican to join His Eminence the Cardinal. And we'll be back with more local news right after this short break. Do stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. When the court case with regards to the fatal shooting incident at Rambukana was taken up for hearing today, Senior Superintendent of Police in charge of Kegol told court today that he had ordered police to fire below the knees at protesters who attempted to set fire to a fuel bowser. Meanwhile, the IGP has stated before the Human Rights Commission that he has ordered the police not to use firearms at any protest held throughout the country. The case pertaining to the fatal shooting incident that took place in Rambukana last Tuesday was taken up for hearing at the Kegol Magistrates Court for the 3rd consecutive day. In court, the investigation team led by the SSP of the Sitawak police area said that statements from 51 civilians have been recorded so far. The team also presented CCTV footage pertaining to the incident in court. It was revealed that the Kegol Police Headquarters had issued 4 T-56 firearms with 30 rounds for each weapon to control the tense situation, and all of the weapons were presented in court. When the magistrate inquired whether the investigators were able to locate the suspect who attempted to set fire to the fuel bowser, the police stated that they are yet to locate him. Evidence was then gathered with regard to the fatal shooting that led to the loss of life of a protester named Chaminda Lakshan. Speaking in court, the SSP in charge of Kegol said that he had ordered tear gas to be fired at protesters who were near the bowser and blocking its path. He also told court that the police managed to save the 2 fuel bowsers when an attempt was made to set fire to them. According to him, he ordered police personnel to fire in the air when the protesters attempted to set fire to a filling station. The Kegol area SSP then said that an order was given by him to the officers to shoot below the knee to prevent major damage after the protesters attempted to set fire to one of the bowsers. He also said that the orders given by him as the senior-most officer at the instance were legal. The ruling with regard to the investigation into the death of Chaminda Lakshan is to be delivered on the 27th of April. In the meantime, Inspector General of Police C.D. Vikramaratne arrived at the Human Rights Commission to record a statement pertaining to the fatal shooting incident in Rambukana. Further, the DIG in charge of the Central Province, the Senior Superintendent of Police in charge of Kegol, and the OICs of Kegol and Rambukana also arrived at the Commission to record their statements. Speaking to media after the recording of statements, Human Rights Commissioner Dr. Nimal Karunasiri stated that the IGP had informed the Commission that he had not authorized the use of firearms at any protest in the country. He also said that the IGP promised to take disciplinary action against all those involved in the shooting of protesters in Rambukana. Meanwhile, the remains of Chaminda Lakshan were brought to his residence in Rambukana today, where his final rites were to be carried out. Meanwhile, Army Commander General Shavendra Silva is requesting the general public to extend their support to a smooth distribution of essential goods across the country that is currently being facilitated by the Tri Forces. He also urged the public to remove barriers placed on main roads and allow vehicles carrying essential goods to reach their locations without any hindrance.
දැනට ජනතාව ඉදිරියේ ඇති ආර්ථික අභියෝගයන් හමුවේ විවිධ ප්‍රදේශවල ශ්‍රී ලංකා වාසී ජනතාව ඉතාමත්ම සාමකාමී ලෙස උද්ඝෝෂණ සහ විරෝධතා පවත්වමින් සිටිනවා. මේ උද්ඝෝෂණ සහ විරෝධතා අතරට ඉතාමත් සුළු පිරිසක් පැමිණිලා විශේෂයෙන්ම මේ මාර්ගයේ ගමන් කරන ජනතාවට එම මාර්ගවල ගමන් කිරීමට අපහසු වෙන ආකාරයෙන් කටයුතු කරමින් සිටින බව අපි පසුගිය දින කිහිපෙහිදීම දැක්කා. ඒ වගේම ඊයේ දිනේ සිට යුද හමුදාව ප්‍රමුඛ ත්‍රිවිධ හමුදාව විශේෂයෙන්ම තෙල් බවුසර රටේ විවිධ ප්‍රදේශ වෙත රැගෙන යාමටත් අනිකුත් අත්‍යවශ්‍ය භාණ්ඩ අනිකුත් ප්‍රදේශවලට රැගෙන යාමටත් පහසුකම් සලසලා දෙන ලෙස ශ්‍රී ලංකා පොලිසිය ත්‍රිවිධ හමුදාවෙන් ඉල්ලීමක් කරනු ලැබුවා. ඒ අනුව අපි ඒ පහසුකම මේ අවස්ථාවේදී සපයමින් සිටිනවා. බුද්ධිමත් ශ්‍රී ලංකා වාසී ජනතාවගෙන් අපි මේ අවස්ථාවේ තාමත්ම කාරුණික ඉල්ලා සිටිනවා. ඔබ යුද සමයේදී ඒ වගේම විශේෂයෙන්ම මේ කොවිඩ් වසංගත කාලයේදී ත්‍රිවිධ හමුදා පොලිසිය සමග එකතු වෙලා ඉතාමත්ම සහයෝගයෙන් කටයුතු කරන ලැබුවා. ඒ ආකාරයෙන්ම මේ අභියෝගාත්මක අවස්ථාවේදී ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ ත්‍රිවිධ හමුදාවට පොලිසියට මේ මාර්ග බාධක ඉවත් කරලා ජනතාවටත් අත්‍යවශ්‍ය භාණ්ඩ රැගෙන යාමටත් අවස්ථාව සලසා දීම සඳහා ඔබගේ සහයෝගය ලබා දෙන ලෙස ආදරණීය ශ්‍රී ලංකා වාසී ජනතාවගෙන් අපි තාමත්ම කාරුණිකව ඉල්ලා සිටිනු ලබනවා.
Public demonstrations against the country's president and the government continued their agitation at Golfish Green today, entering their 14th day. More protests supporting the Golfish protests worked off in several areas of the island, echoing the same calls.
Today marks the 14th consecutive day of the anti-government protests at Golfish Green, calling president and government to resign. As usual, the members of the public gave their fullest support to strengthen the anti-government calls as more people arrived at the protest site during the day. A protest march that began from the St. Sebastian Church in Katuwapitia demanding justice for the victims of the Easter Sunday attack entered into the protest site today. A member of the Buddhist clergy who engaged in a hunger strike fast on to death until the resignation of the president and the government was admitted to the hospital following the worsening of his health status. Meanwhile, several protests worked off in the area in the other parts of the island, urging the government to resign immediately. In several areas, including Piliyandala, more protests worked off seeking justice to the victim of the Ramukkana protest. Last night, in the areas of Anuradhapura and Chilaw, demonstrations were held urging to fulfill justice to Easter attack victims.
Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara has assured that steps will be taken to normalize the country's fuel situation in the coming days through effective fuel distribution with the deployment of more fuel trucks and trains as well. During his visit to the Ceylon petroleum storage terminals, discussions were held to enable the establishing of an operation center at the location to ensure an effective fuel distribution process. Despite assurances given by the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation on the availability of sufficient fuel stocks, queues still exist outside refueling stations. Further, some filling stations have remained closed during the day due to unavailability of fuel. In this backdrop, fuel purchase through the Indian credit line is expected to come to an end by the second week of May. Sri Lanka is expecting to secure another credit line of $500 million from India, with the nation currently unable to source foreign exchange to pay for its shipments. However, according to experts, a $500 million credit line can only be sufficient for 2 months and is obviously not a long-term solution to the energy crisis. What the public continues to demand from the government is a long-term solution as queues get longer and their frustrations continue to rise. In this backdrop, during a visit to the Ceylon petroleum storage terminals in Kolonnawa, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara says that steps will be taken to normalize the country's fuel situation in the next few days through effective fuel distribution. The minister added that an operation centre will be established at the terminal in order to normalize and expedite fuel supplies with the assistance of the Tri-Forces and the Sri Lanka Police. Meanwhile, on the country's gas situation, former chairman of Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation, Vijita Herat, was appointed yesterday as the new chairman of Litro Gas Lanka Limited. He was also the former chairman of the Ceylon Electricity Board. Hours after his appointment, the company has decided to increase the price of its 12.5 kilogram gas cylinder that is currently sold at 2,679 rupees to a staggering 5,175 rupees with effect from midnight today. However, the decision has now been revoked as the government has not granted approval for the price hike. In this backdrop, Litro Gas also announced that the distribution of cylinders will be halted until the 25th of April due to the lack of LPG stocks. However, a Litro official confirmed to AdaDerana English News that distribution will begin again on the 27th of April following the arrival of a 3,500 metric ton LPG shipment. The official also stated that another LPG shipment of 3,500 metric tons is expected to arrive on the 28th. In the meantime, the Public Utilities Commission has approved 3-hour and 20-minute power cuts and 3-hour power cuts for tomorrow and the day after respectively, following a request made by the Ceylon Electricity Board. Meanwhile, the Chinese government yesterday gave the go-ahead for a batch of Sri Lankan students studying in Chinese universities but currently stranded in Sri Lanka due to COVID-related restrictions to return to their campuses to resume in-person learning. China's decision to allow Sri Lankan students to return was announced by the Sri Lankan embassy in Beijing in a statement yesterday. In the statement, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China informed that the Chinese embassy in Colombo has finalized 2 groups of students to return to China. Additional students are being processed to return to China, the Sri Lankan embassy statement said. It added that the embassy will continue with its efforts to enable all students to return to their studies as soon as possible. The embassy statement did not say how many students from Sri Lanka were being allowed to return. According to China's Education Ministry, until the end of 2018, 492,185 international students from 196 countries and regions were studying in China. Welcome back. Inflation in the month of March has reached a staggering 21.5% according to the National Consumer Price Index issued by the Department of Census and Statistics. The department says that the high inflation for the month of March was mainly due to the high prices in both food and non-food groups. Sri Lanka's overall rate of inflation, as measured by the National Consumer Price Index on a year-on-year basis, has been recorded at 21.5% in March 2022, according to the Department of Census and Statistics. This was revealed in the National Consumer Price Index issued for the month of March 2022 that recorded headline inflation for the month of February at 17.5%. With respect to March 2021, the reported inflation for the month of March 2022 was mainly due to the higher prices in both food and non-food groups, the department explained. Accordingly, year-on-year inflation in the food group increased to 29.5% in March 2022 from 24.7% in February 2022, while year-on-year inflation in the non-food group increased to 14.5% in March from 11% in February. Comparing the month-on-month changes, the NCPI in March 2022 showed an increase to 172.7 points from 167.8 reported in February 2022. This marks an increase of 4.9 index points or 2.9 percentage points compared to February. This also represents an increase in the expenditure value of 1,572.34 rupees in the market basket. The month-on-month change was contributed by increases of index values of food items by 1.22% and non-food items by 1.7% respectively. And that's all the news we have for you tonight. We'll see you again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.